The first RPG turned the lead MRAP into a coffin of twisted metal and screaming men. Captain Tobias Rendell felt the blast wave slam his vehicle sideways as the valley erupted with gunfire from both ridgelines. 340 Marines. That was how many souls were in his convoy, and in the space of 6 seconds, they had driven directly into hell. Muzzle flashes sparked like deadly fireflies along the rocky slopes above them, and Rendell knew with sickening certainty that they had been expected. This was not a chance encounter. This was an execution. 47 kilometers away at Camp Dwyer, Gunnery Sergeant Cordelia Okonkwo stood frozen in the Tactical Operations Center as the distress call crackled through the speakers. Viper 6, this is Viper 6 actual. We are under heavy contact. Grid reference follows. The voice belonged to Rendell, a man she had served with in Fallujah 3 years ago. A man whose life she had saved when everything went sideways in that burning city. Now his voice carried the unmistakable tone of a commander watching his Marines die around him, requesting immediate support. We are pinned in the valley. Casualties mounting. How copy? Delia's hand gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. She knew that valley. She had studied every terrain feature in Helmand Province during the 8 months she had been stuck behind this desk, waiting for clearance to return to the field. The Sanjin corridor was a nightmare of overlapping fields of fire, a natural kill box that the Taliban had used for years. If Rendell's convoy was trapped there, they were in the worst possible position. The TOC erupted into controlled chaos around her. Radio operators relayed coordinates. Intelligence analysts pulled satellite imagery. But Delia saw what they did not seem to understand yet. She grabbed a marker and drew rapid lines on the map board. Here and here, she said, pointing to the ridge lines. Those are the primary ambush positions. They will have secondary teams here and here to cut off retreat. Standard Taliban playbook for this valley. The convoy has maybe 3 hours before they run out of ammunition, less if the enemy has mortars. A young lieutenant looked at her with something between surprise and skepticism. And you know this how, Gunnery Sergeant? Because I spent 2 years hunting these bastards before some colonel decided a woman with shrapnel scars belonged behind a desk instead of in the fight. Before the lieutenant could respond, the door to the TOC swung open and Master Sergeant Dwayne Pollard strode in with a young private in tow. The private's face was flushed with humiliation, and Pollard's voice carried the satisfied cruelty of a man who enjoyed his authority. This one was sleeping on watch, he announced loudly. I say we make an example. Delia turned from the map. The private was barely 19, exhaustion carved into his features. She had seen Marines like him before, pushed past their limits by deployment cycles that never seemed to end. Pollard was already reaching for the private's collar when Delia stepped between them. What is your name, Private? Hollister, Gunnery Sergeant. Jerome Hollister. Private Hollister, were you sleeping or were you resting your eyes during a 12-hour shift that should have been 8? The young Marine hesitated, glancing at Pollard. I was tired, Gunnery Sergeant. I made a mistake. Pollard stepped forward. Gunny, this is not your concern. This Marine is in my section and he will be disciplined accordingly. Delia did not move. Your section has been running double shifts for 3 weeks because you keep losing Marines to heat casualties from your punishment PT sessions. Maybe the discipline problem is not the private. She held Pollard's gaze until he looked away. Get some water and 4 hours of rack time, Hollister. Then report to the sergeant major. After Hollister hurried out, Pollard's face twisted with anger. You had no right to interfere with my Marines, and you have no right to break them. Walk away, Master Sergeant. Pollard left, but not before shooting her a look that promised future problems. Delia turned back to the map, her mind already calculating distances and timelines. 340 Marines were dying in that valley, and she was stuck here fighting petty tyrants while the real enemy closed in for the kill. The radio crackled again. Viper 6 actual, this is Warlord Main. Say again your request. Rendell's response was punctuated by gunfire. Warlord Main, we need air support and QRF immediately. We have 30+ casualties and climbing. Enemy strength estimated at Company Plus. We cannot hold this position. Delia waited for the response, her heart pounding. Every second of delay meant more Marines bleeding out on Afghan soil. The reply came cold and clinical. Viper 6, Warlord Main. QRF assets are not available at this time. Air support is allocated to priority operations. Recommend you consolidate defensive positions and await further guidance. Not available. Delia felt the words like a physical blow. She looked around the TOC at the other Marines, saw the same disbelief on their faces. They were going to let 340 Marines die because someone had decided they were not a priority. She reached for the radio handset. Her fingers hovered over the transmit button. Every regulation, every order, every career instinct told her to stand down and let the chain of command work. But she had heard that cold voice before. She had watched Marines die before while officers calculated acceptable losses. Her hand dropped from the radio. Not yet. Not like this. She turned to find Sergeant Major Elijah Crane watching her from the doorway, his weathered face unreadable. He had 30 years in the Corps, and those eyes had seen everything. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Crane gave an almost imperceptible nod and walked away. Delia looked back at the map where Rendell's convoy was marked with a small red X. 340 Marines. And someone had just decided they were acceptable losses. But Gunnery Sergeant Cordelia Okonkwo did not accept that math. She never had. And as she stared at that red X, a plan began to form in her mind. The video link to Camp Leatherneck took 4 minutes to establish, and every second felt like a lifetime. Delia stood at attention before the screen as Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Tate's face materialized in harsh digital resolution. He was a lean man with silver temples and the kind of calculated composure that came from decades of political navigation. His office behind him was immaculate, decorated with commendations and photographs of himself with various generals. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, Tate said without preamble, "I understand you have concerns about the convoy situation. Sir, I am requesting permission to lead a quick reaction force to extract the trapped Marines in the Sanjin corridor. I have tactical knowledge of the terrain and a viable rescue plan." Tate's expression did not change. "Denied, Colonel. With respect, those Marines have approximately 2 hours of ammunition remaining. If we do not act now, we will lose all 340 of them. I am aware of the tactical situation, Gunnery Sergeant. I am also aware that sending additional forces into that valley would likely result in more casualties, not fewer. The enemy has prepared positions and numerical superiority. A rescue attempt would be throwing good Marines after bad." Delia felt heat rise in her chest. "Sir, I have studied that valley extensively. There are infiltration routes along the eastern ridge that would allow a small team to reach the convoy and coordinate a fighting withdrawal. It is not a suicide mission if it is executed correctly." Tate leaned forward slightly, and for a moment something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Let me be clear, Gunnery Sergeant. You're a logistics coordinator currently on limited duty status due to a previous injury. You are not in any chain of command relevant to combat operations. Your request is not only denied, it is outside your authority to make." "Those are my Marines out there, Colonel. Those are my Marines," Tate corrected sharply. "Mine. And I have made the operational decision that a rescue attempt is not viable. The convoy has been instructed to consolidate and hold until air assets become available. And when will that be, sir? That is not your concern. What is your concern is remaining at your post and performing your assigned duties. Do I make myself clear?" Delia's jaw tightened. "Crystal clear, sir." "Good." Tate's image flickered slightly. "And Gunnery Sergeant, I am aware of your record. I know what happened in Fallujah. Do not let your personal history cloud your judgment about what is possible in this situation. Some battles cannot be won." Dismissed. The screen went dark. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who served in Afghanistan, or perhaps you have your own story of someone who refused to give up when others had written them off. Delia stood alone in the empty briefing room for a long moment, her hands trembling with suppressed rage. Some battles cannot be won. She had heard those words before, spoken by men who had never bled in the dirt beside the Marines they commanded. Men who calculated lives like balance sheets and called it leadership. She walked back to her quarters through the dusty twilight of Camp Dwyer. The base was quiet, most personnel either on duty or resting before night operations. In her small room, she sat on the edge of her rack and pulled a worn photograph from her cargo pocket. Four faces stared back at her, young Marines covered in Fallujah dust, arms around each other, grinning like they were invincible. 3 of them had not made it home. Delia traced her finger over the face of Lance Corporal Terrence Wade, 19 years old, killed by a sniper's bullet while she was pulling his wounded squad mate to cover. She had promised him she would come back for him. By the time she did, he was gone. Never again. She had sworn it over his body, over all their bodies. She would never leave another Marine behind if there was any chance, any possibility of bringing them home. A knock at her door pulled her from the memory. She tucked the photograph away and opened it to find Sergeant Major Crane standing in the dim corridor, his weathered face cast in shadow. "Mind if I come in, Gunny?" She stepped aside, and he entered, his experienced eyes taking in her sparse quarters with a single sweep. "I heard your conversation with the colonel," Crane said quietly. "Walls are thin around the TOC. Then you heard him shut me down. I heard him make a calculated decision to protect his career at the expense of 340 Marines." Crane's voice carried no emotion, but his words landed like hammer blows. "I have seen his type before. Men who climb ranks by never making mistakes, which really means never taking risks that might expose them to blame." Delia studied him carefully. "Why are you telling me this, Sergeant Major?" "Because I also saw your face when that call came in. I saw the way you looked at that map. You're not the type to let this go, are you? Would you be?" Crane was silent for a moment. "I have a nephew in that convoy, Lance Corporal Marcus Khan. He is 22 years old, and his mother calls me every Sunday to make sure he is still alive." He paused. "So no, I will not let it go either." Delia felt something shift in the room, recognition passing between 2 warriors who understood what duty really meant. "I have a plan," she said slowly. "It is risky. It would require volunteers who understand they might not come back. And it would mean directly disobeying Colonel Tate's orders." Crane nodded slowly. "I figured as much. If we get caught, it is the end of both our careers. Courts-martial, possibly prison. I have 30 years in this Corps, Gunny. 30 years of doing things the right way, following orders, trusting the chain of command." Crane's eyes hardened. "But I did not spend 3 decades becoming a Marine just to watch Marines die, because some politician in uniform decided they were not worth saving." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "I know every supply sergeant on this base. I know which vehicles are scheduled for maintenance and which ones actually work. And I know at least a dozen Marines who would volunteer for a mission like this without hesitation." Delia felt the first spark of hope since that distress call had shattered the morning. "We would need to move fast," she said. 12 hours at most before the convoy is overrun. Then we better get started." Crane moved toward the door, then paused. "Gunny, what happened in Fallujah, the Marines you lost? That was not your fault." Delia's throat tightened. "I know, but the ones I am about to save, those are my responsibility." Crane gave her a look of respect that transcended rank. "Then let us go get our people back." The motor pool at 0300 was a graveyard of shadows and diesel fumes. Delia moved between the rows of vehicles with Crane at her side, their footsteps quiet against the packed earth. They had 3 hours before dawn and less than 12 before Rendell's convoy would be completely overrun. Crane stopped beside a row of up-armored Humvees. "These were scheduled for maintenance starting tomorrow. Officially, they have transmission issues. Unofficially, they run fine. The motor pool sergeant owes me a favor from Ramadi." "What kind of favor gets us 4 vehicles without paperwork?" "The kind where I did not report his sergeant for running a side business selling fuel to local contractors." Crane shrugged. "Everyone has leverage, Gunny. You just have to know where to look." A figure emerged from behind one of the Humvees, and Delia's hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm before she recognized the face. Staff Sergeant Marcus Adeyemi stepped into the dim light, his dark features calm and watchful. He was tall and lean, with the quiet competence of a man who had learned to solve problems without drawing attention. "Sergeant Major," he said with a slight nod. "Gunnery Sergeant. I heard you might need someone who knows how to make supplies disappear from inventory systems." Delia studied him. "And why would you volunteer for something like that, Staff Sergeant?" Adeyemi met her eyes. "My family came to America from Lagos when I was 7. My father always said that Nigerians and Americans share one thing above all else. We do not abandon our people." He paused. "Also, my cousin is a corpsman attached to that convoy. So this is personal." Delia felt an unexpected connection to this man. Her own parents had made a similar journey, carrying the same values across an ocean. "Welcome to the team, Staff Sergeant." Over the next hour, Crane brought 4 more volunteers to the motor pool. Each one had their own reasons for risking everything. Corporal Yusuf Hassan, a radio operator whose best friend was trapped in the valley. Lance Corporal Destiny Vega, a young communications specialist with fierce eyes and steady hands. Private First Class Jerome Hollister, the same young Marine Delia had defended earlier that day. And Sergeant Diana Kolchak, a combat medic who had already survived 3 deployments and volunteered with a simple nod when Crane explained the mission. 6 volunteers, 7 including herself. It was not enough for a conventional rescue, but Delia had never planned on conventional. She was explaining the infiltration route when footsteps crunched on gravel outside the motor pool. Everyone froze. Delia gestured sharply, and the team melted into the shadows between vehicles. 2 figures in MP armbands walked past the open bay door, flashlights sweeping lazily across the entrance. One of them paused, his beam lingering on the Humvees. "Thought I heard something," he said to his partner. "Probably rats. This place is crawling with them." The MPs moved on, their footsteps fading into the night. Delia waited a full minute before signaling the all clear. "Security is getting curious," Crane muttered. "We need to move faster." Adeyemi pulled out a tablet. Its screen dimmed to minimum brightness. "I have been monitoring base communications. Colonel Tate has requested increased patrols around all vehicle storage areas. He is looking for something, or someone," Delia said quietly. "He knows I am not the type to follow orders I disagree with." Vega stepped forward, her young face tight with urgency. "Gunnery Sergeant, there is something else. I have been listening to intercepted enemy communications as part of my regular duties. The chatter before the ambush, it was wrong." "Wrong how?" "Too quiet. For an operation this size, there should have been days of coordination traffic. Movement orders, supply requests, personnel assignments. But there was almost nothing until 6 hours before the attack." She hesitated. It is like they knew exactly when and where to hit the convoy without needing to plan for it. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. "You're saying someone told them," Kolchak said flatly. "I am saying the ambush was too perfect. The timing, the positioning, the fact that they hit the convoy at the exact point where air support would take longest to reach." Vega shook her head. "That is not luck. That is intelligence." Delia felt cold fury building in her chest. If there was a leak, it meant someone on their own side had sent those Marines into a trap. Someone with access to convoy routes and schedules. Someone high enough in the chain of command to know operational details. Someone like Colonel Tate. She pushed the thought aside. There would be time for answers later. Right now, 340 Marines were running out of ammunition and hope. "We stick to the plan," she said firmly. "Infiltrate through the eastern ridge, link up with the convoy, coordinate a fighting withdrawal to the extraction point. Whatever happened before the ambush, we deal with after we get our people out." Crane nodded approvingly. Spoken like a Marine. Adeyemi looked up from his tablet. "Gunny, I can have the vehicles fueled and loaded within 2 hours. Weapons, ammunition, medical supplies, everything we need for a 12-hour operation. Do it." As the team dispersed to their tasks, Hollister lingered behind. "Gunnery Sergeant, I wanted to thank you for earlier." With Master Sergeant Pollard, Delia looked at the young private, seeing echoes of another young Marine she had not been able to save. "Do not thank me yet, Hollister. This mission is going to be harder than anything you have faced. People might not come back." "I know, Gunnery Sergeant." That is why I volunteered. Hollister straightened. You stood up for me when nobody else would. Now, I'm going to stand up for those Marines in that valley. For a moment, Delia saw Terrence Wade's face superimposed over Hollister's features. The same youth, the same determination, the same willingness to risk everything for something larger than himself. Then stay close and follow orders, she said quietly. I'm bringing everyone home this time. The words felt like a promise and a prayer wrapped together. 2 hours until departure. 12 hours until the convoy was overrun. And somewhere in the command structure above her, someone might be actively working to make sure those Marines never made it home. But Gunnery Sergeant Cordelia Okonkwo had made her choice. She was going into that valley, and God help anyone who tried to stop her. 12 kilometers away at Camp Leatherneck, Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Tate sat alone in his office with the door locked and the blinds drawn. The satellite phone in his hand was not military issue. It was a personal device, untraceable, purchased specifically for conversations that could never appear in official records. The situation is contained, he said quietly into the receiver. The convoy has been written off as unrecoverable. No rescue attempt will be authorized. The voice on the other end was distorted, scrambled through multiple encryption layers. And if questions arise about the intelligence warnings, I have already ensured that the relevant communications were removed from the server logs. As far as anyone will ever know, we had no advance warning of enemy positions in that corridor. Tate's jaw tightened. The convoy commander made a tactical error entering hostile territory without adequate reconnaissance. Tragic but not preventable. There was a pause on the line. You understand what happens if this unravels. It will not unravel. Tate glanced at the photograph on his desk, showing him shaking hands with a 3-star general at a promotion ceremony. I have too much to lose and too much invested in this command to let some inconvenient casualties derail my career. The matter is closed. He ended the call and placed the phone in his desk drawer behind a false panel he had installed himself. 340 Marines were dying in a valley 47 kilometers from Camp Dwyer, and Vernon Tate felt nothing but the cold calculation of a man protecting his future. Back at Camp Dwyer, the rescue team worked in focused silence. Adeyemi had performed miracles with the supply system, requisitioning ammunition and medical equipment under falsified authorization codes that would take days to trace. Crates of rifle magazines, grenades, trauma kits, and water containers were loaded into the 4 Humvees with practiced efficiency. Kolchak organized the medical supplies with the grim expertise of someone who had seen too many combat injuries. She packed extra tourniquets, hemostatic agents, and morphine auto-injectors, preparing for casualties she hoped they would not take. In the shadows between 2 vehicles, Vega sat alone, her shoulders hunched and her hands trembling slightly. Delia noticed and approached quietly, settling beside the young lance corporal without speaking. After a moment, Vega broke the silence. I did not tell you everything earlier, Gunnery Sergeant, about why this mission matters to me. I know your communication skills are valuable, Vega. That is why you are here. Vega shook her head. It is not just that. My brother is in that convoy. Corporal Alejandro Vega. He is a vehicle mechanic assigned to the support element. She swallowed hard. He joined the Marines because of me. I told him would give him direction, purpose, a future. And now he is trapped in that valley because I convinced him to enlist. Delia absorbed this information in silence. Another personal stake. Another family that would be destroyed if she failed. How old is he? 23. 2 years younger than me. Vega's voice cracked. He called me before the convoy left. Said he had a bad feeling about the route, but did not want to seem like a coward by saying anything to his NCO. I told him he was being paranoid. Delia put a hand on Vega's shoulder. Your brother's instincts were right, and you are going to help me bring him home. Vega looked up, her eyes wet but her jaw set with determination. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. I am. Across the motor pool, Hassan and Hollister were conducting final weapons checks. Hassan held up his rifle and squinted at Hollister with mock severity. You know how to use one of these, Private? Or do they only teach you how to sleep on watch? Hollister grinned, despite the tension. I qualified expert, corporal. Probably shoot better than you. Hassan laughed quietly. Good, because where we're going, we're going to need every rifle we can get. He paused, then added more seriously, you scared? Terrified, Hollister admitted. Good, that means you are smart. Hassan chambered around. The ones who are not scared are the ones who get people killed. Crane approached Delia with a final status report. Vehicles are fueled and loaded. Weapons distributed. Communications equipment tested. We are as ready as we are going to be. Delia checked her watch. 90 minutes until they needed to depart. The window was closing fast. Adeyemi jogged over, slightly out of breath. Gunny, we have a problem. Base security just changed their patrol rotation. They are sending a vehicle sweep through this sector in 20 minutes instead of 40. Can we move the departure up? Negative. I still need to finish spoofing the gate logs, so it looks like these vehicles are heading to a legitimate supply run at Firebase Griffin. If we leave before that is done, we will be flagged as unauthorized the moment we hit the checkpoint. Delia made a rapid calculation. Then we hide. Everyone, get the vehicles into the maintenance bay and kill all lights. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks until the patrol passes. The team sprang into action. Engines started and vehicles rolled into the darkened maintenance bay at the back of the motor pool. Doors closed. Lights extinguished. 7 Marines pressed themselves into the shadows and waited. Minutes passed like hours. Delia could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then she heard it, the rumble of approaching engines. The sweep of headlights across the motor pool entrance. 2 security vehicles pulled into the lot, their lights cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting for escaped prisoners. Voices carried through the thin walls of the maintenance bay. Check the perimeter. Colonel wants a full sweep of all vehicle storage areas. Footsteps approached the bay door. A flashlight beam probed through the gap at the bottom. Delia held her breath. The handle rattled. Then a radio crackled. All units, we have a disturbance at the north gate. Local nationals attempting unauthorized entry. Respond immediately. The footsteps retreated. Engines revved. The security vehicles tore out of the motor pool and disappeared into the night. Delia exhaled slowly. That was too close. Crane emerged from behind a Humvee, his face grim. We need to move now, Gunny, before they come back. Adeyemi checked his tablet. Gate logs are spoofed. We're clear to roll. Delia looked at her team. 6 Marines who had chosen to risk everything for strangers trapped in a valley of death. They were afraid. She could see it in their eyes. But they were also ready. Mount up, she ordered. We have Marines to bring home. They were 30 seconds from departure when new headlights cut through the darkness. 2 Humvees coming fast down the access road toward the maintenance bay. Delia's hand moved to her sidearm as the headlights swept toward the maintenance bay. This was it. 8 months of fighting to get back in the field, and she was about to be caught before the mission even started. Then the vehicles turned. The 2 Humvees veered left at the last intersection, heading toward the fuel depot on the opposite side of the base. A routine logistics run. Nothing more. Delia watched their taillights disappear into the darkness and allowed herself to breathe. Crane appeared at her shoulder. We need to go. Right now. She nodded and climbed into the lead vehicle. The convoy rolled out of the maintenance bay in a tight formation, for Humvees moving through the sleeping base like ghosts. Adeyemi's spoof credentials worked perfectly at the checkpoint, and the gate guard waved them through with barely a glance at the falsified supply manifest. They were outside the wire within minutes, swallowed by the vast darkness of the Afghan night. The first hour passed in tense silence. Delia rode in the lead vehicle with Crane driving and Hassan monitoring the radio. Behind them, the other 3 Humvees maintained tight intervals, their headlights dimmed to tactical blackout mode. The road was rough, pockmarked with craters from old IED strikes that had never been properly filled. Hassan suddenly held up a hand, intercepting enemy chatter. Multiple contacts moving along the ridge to our east. They are not tracking us, but they are close. How close? 2 kilometers, maybe less. Delia studied the terrain through her night vision. The ridge Hassan mentioned was a dark line against the stars, invisible to the naked eye, but crawling with enemies who would kill them all if given the chance. She made a decision. Kill all lights. We go dark from here. The convoy plunged into complete blackness, navigating only by night vision and GPS. It was slower, more dangerous, but it kept them invisible to anyone watching from the high ground. In the second vehicle, Vega sat with her rifle across her lap, thinking about her brother. Alejandro had always been the cautious one, the planner, the one who checked everything twice before acting. If he had a bad feeling about that convoy route, he had been right to worry. She wondered if he was still alive, still fighting, still hoping that someone would come for him. The convoy crept through a narrow valley, cliffs rising on either side like the walls of a tomb. Delia felt the weight of command pressing down on her. 7 lives depended on her decisions. 340 more waited in the kill zone ahead. Crane broke the silence. You know what the hardest part of this job is, Gunny? She glanced at him. What is that, Sergeant Major? The waiting, the not knowing. He kept his eyes on the road. I have buried more Marines than I can count. Good men, good women, all of them. And every single time, I wonder if there was something I could have done different. Something that would have brought them home. Delia was quiet for a moment. My father was a police officer in Lagos, Nigeria, before we came to America. Crane raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, letting her continue. He was killed when I was 12. Armed robbers tried to take a busload of school children hostage. My father was the first officer on scene. He could have waited for backup, followed protocol, done everything by the book. Instead, he went in alone. He saved 11 children before they shot him. I am sorry, Gunny. Do not be. She stared through the windshield at the darkness ahead. He made a choice. He decided that those children's lives were worth more than his own safety, more than the rules that told him to wait. That is why I became a Marine. That is why I cannot leave those 340 souls to die in that valley. Because my father taught me that some things are worth breaking the rules for. Crane nodded slowly. He sounded like a good man. He was the best man I ever knew. A burst of static cut through the moment. Hassan leaned forward, pressing his headset closer to his ear. Gunny, I'm picking up transmissions for Viper 6. They are broadcasting in the clear now. No encryption. That meant Rendell's communications equipment was either destroyed or they had abandoned security protocols out of desperation. Neither option was good. Put it through, Delia ordered. Rendell's voice filled the vehicle, broken with static and the unmistakable sounds of combat. Any station, this is Viper 6 actual. We are at approximately 30% effective strength. Enemy assault is intensifying. Request immediate support at grid reference follows. Hassan wrote down the coordinates as Rendell continued. We're down to final magazines. Repeat, we are Winchester on primary ammunition, falling back to secondary defensive positions. If anyone can hear this, we need help now. Viper 6 out. The radio went silent. Delia felt the urgency like a physical weight. They were still 2 hours from the valley at their current pace. Crane, push it faster. We are running out of time. The vehicles accelerated, bouncing over rough terrain. 10 minutes passed, then 20. They were making good progress when the third Humvee in the column suddenly lurched and died. Adeyemi's voice came over the radio. Lead vehicle, this is 3. We have a mechanical failure. Engine seized. We are not going anywhere. Delia ordered the convoy to halt and ran back to assess the damage. Smoke poured from the Humvee's engine compartment. Kolchak was already pulling medical supplies from the back while Adeyemi examined the engine with a flashlight. Transmission is gone, he reported. This vehicle is dead. Can we tow it? Not through this terrain. It would slow us down too much. Delia made the calculation instantly. Redistribute personnel and essential supplies to the remaining 3 vehicles. Strip anything useful and leave the rest. The team worked fast, transferring ammunition, water, and medical gear. Hollister and Vega squeezed into already crowded vehicles. Within 10 minutes, they were moving again, but now they had 1 less vehicle, less capacity for casualties, and less margin for error. Crane looked at her as they rolled forward. We just lost 1/4 of our transport capacity, Gunny. I know. If we take heavy casualties in that valley, we might not have room to bring everyone out. Delia's jaw tightened. Then we make sure we do not take heavy casualties. But even as she said the words, she knew the math was getting worse. 3 vehicles, 7 rescuers, 340 Marines waiting in a kill zone. And somewhere ahead, the enemy was waiting too. The convoy pushed deeper into hostile territory as the first hints of dawn began to gray the eastern horizon. They had been moving for 4 hours, and every minute that passed meant more Marines dying in the valley ahead. Delia checked her watch obsessively, calculating distances and timelines, knowing that the math was growing worse with every heartbeat. Adeyemi had been quiet for the last hour, hunched over his tablet in the back of the lead vehicle, scrolling through intercepted communications with growing intensity. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Gunny, you need to see this." "What is it?" "I have been monitoring encrypted traffic from Camp Leatherneck, using some access codes I probably should not have." Adeyemi handed her the tablet. "There is a communication thread from 48 hours before the convoy departed. Intelligence assessment from Regional Command." Delia took the device and read the glowing text, her blood turning to ice with every word. The report was comprehensive and damning. Regional intelligence assets had identified significant enemy movement in the Sanjin corridor 3 days before the convoy was scheduled to transit. Pattern analysis indicated a high probability of coordinated ambush. Recommended action was to delay the convoy and route through alternative corridors until the threat could be assessed and neutralized. The distribution list showed the message had been sent to Lieutenant Colonel Tate's command staff. The timestamp showed it had been received and opened. There was no follow-up, no route change, no delay. Tate knew, Delia said quietly. The words came out flat, dead, carrying a weight that seemed to crush the air in the vehicle. He knew there was a high probability of ambush in that valley, and he sent the convoy through anyway. Crane's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Why? Why would he do that? Adeyemi pulled up another document. I found the answer to that, too. The convoy was carrying supplies to Firebase Phoenix as part of a high-visibility resupply operation. General Morrison was scheduled to visit the Firebase 3 days later for a media event showcasing successful logistics operations in Helmand Province. If the convoy was delayed or rerouted, it would not arrive in time for the general's visit. Delia stared at the screen. He sacrificed 340 Marines for a photo opportunity. Not just that. Adeyemi's voice was bitter. If the ambush never happened, Tate would have looked like a decisive commander who pushed through despite intelligence warnings. High risk, high reward. His career would have gotten a major boost. And when it went wrong, Delia continued, he covered it up, deleted the intelligence warnings, blamed the convoy commander for poor tactical decisions. Let them die rather than admit he made a mistake. Hassan had been listening from the radio station, his young face twisted with rage. We have to expose him. When we get back, we have to make sure everyone knows what he did. First we have to get back, Crane said grimly. And first we have to save those Marines he threw away. Delia handed the tablet back to Adeyemi. Save everything. Copy it to multiple devices. When this is over, Tate is going to answer for what he has done. She turned to face the team through the vehicle's internal radio. All units, this is lead. You have all heard what we just learned. Colonel Tate knowingly sent that convoy into a kill zone to advance his career. He is letting them die to cover his mistake. She paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. I will understand if any of you want to turn back. This mission just got a lot more complicated. We are not just defying orders anymore. We are exposing a conspiracy that goes to the top of our command structure. Silence stretched across the radio channel. Then Vega's voice came through, steady and hard. My brother is in that valley because of Tate's ambition. I am not turning back. Hollister spoke next. Those Marines deserve to know someone is coming for them. I am in. Kolchak, Hassan, Adeyemi, each voice added to the chorus. No one was turning back. Crane glanced at Delia with something like pride in his weathered eyes. You heard them, Gunny. We are all in. Delia felt a surge of emotion that she quickly suppressed. There would be time for feelings later. Right now, there was only the mission. The convoy crested a ridge, and suddenly the Sanjin Valley spread out before them in the pale morning light. It was beautiful in a terrible way, a winding corridor of brown and gray cutting through the mountains, the kind of landscape that painters might capture if they did not know what lurked in its shadows. From their elevated position, Delia could see the distant smudge of smoke rising from multiple points along the valley floor. That was where Rendell's convoy had been trapped, where 340 Marines had spent the night fighting for their lives while their own command abandoned them. The enemy positions were visible too, dark figures moving along the ridge lines, vehicles clustered at strategic choke points. The Taliban had the valley locked down tight. Getting in would be dangerous. Getting out with hundreds of survivors would be nearly impossible. Crane studied the terrain through binoculars. They have the obvious routes covered, overlapping fields of fire along the main road. Anyone who tries to drive in there is going to get shredded. Delia had been planning for this. She pointed to a narrow cut in the eastern ridge, barely visible in the morning shadows. There, that ravine leads down to the valley floor about 2 kilometers north of the convoy's position. It is too narrow for vehicles, but we can get close enough on foot to link up with Rendell. And then what? How do we get 300-plus casualties out through that ravine? We do not. She traced a route on her map. We push south through the enemy positions, break their perimeter, and extract along the main road once we have cleared a path. That is insane, Hassan said quietly. That is the only way, Delia replied. She looked at each of them in turn. We go in light, move fast, and hit them where they're not expecting. Tate thought these Marines were acceptable losses. We're going to prove them wrong. She shouldered her rifle and checked her ammunition. 48 hours ago, someone decided that 340 lives were worth less than a career. Now it was time to show him how wrong he was. They left the vehicles hidden in a rocky outcropping 2 kilometers from the valley entrance, covered with camouflage netting and guarded by nothing but hope. From here, they would proceed on foot through terrain that wanted to kill them almost as much as the enemy did. Delia gathered her team in the shadow of a boulder, their faces painted with tactical camouflage, their eyes reflecting the weight of what lay ahead. The sun was fully up now, which meant they had lost the cover of darkness. Every step from this point forward would be a calculated risk. The ravine is 400 meters east, she said quietly, pointing to the narrow cut in the ridge. We move in Tubatuo formation. No talking, hand signals only. If we encounter enemy positions, we bypass if possible, eliminate silently if not. Kolchak checked her medical bag one final time. And if someone gets hit, we keep moving. Delia's voice was hard. I know that sounds cold, but if we stop, we all die, and so do the 340 Marines waiting for us. Anyone who falls behind gets picked up on the way out. The team exchanged glances, but no one argued. They understood the math. Before they moved out, Hollister approached Delia with hesitation in his young eyes. Gunnery Sergeant, can I ask you something? Make it quick, Private. You said earlier that you lost Marines in Fallujah. He swallowed. What happened? Delia was silent for a long moment. She rarely spoke about Fallujah, about the weight she carried from that burning city. But something about this young Marine, about the fear and determination warring in his face, made her want to answer. We were conducting a building clearance in the Jolin district. My squad, 8 Marines. We got ambushed in a residential complex, enemy fighters on multiple floors. She paused, the memories flooding back like poison. We fought our way to the roof for extraction, but the helicopter could only take 4 at a time. I sent the first group out, the wounded, and stayed with the rest to hold the position. What happened to them? The helicopter took RPG fire on its return trip. It crashed 3 blocks away. Delia's voice was steady, but her eyes were distant. I led the remaining 4 Marines through enemy territory to reach the crash site. We found survivors, pulled them out. But by the time we got back to the original position, the 3 Marines I had left to hold it were dead. Terrence Wade, Shonda Mills, and James Ochoa. They died waiting for me to come back. Hollister was quiet. I made a promise over their bodies, Delia continued. I swore I would never leave another Marine behind if there was any chance of bringing them home. She looked at him directly. That is why we are here, Private. That is why I will walk into that valley, even if it kills me. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a worn brass badge with Nigerian police insignia. It was her father's badge, the one he had been wearing when he died, saving those children in Lagos. She had carried it through 3 deployments, through Fallujah, through every dark moment when she needed to remember why she fought. Take this, she said, pressing it into Hollister's palm. He stared at her. Gunnery Sergeant, I cannot accept this. This belonged to your father, and now it belongs to you until this mission is over. Delia closed his fingers around the badge. My father believed that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else is more important than fear. You showed courage when you volunteered for this mission. Now show it again by bringing that badge back to me when we get home. Hollister straightened, something hardening in his young face. I will, Gunnery Sergeant. I promise. The team moved out. The ravine was narrower than it had appeared from the ridge, barely wide enough for single-file movement in some places. They scrambled over rocks and through thorny scrub, every sound amplified in the confined space. Above them, the sky was a ribbon of blue between towering cliff walls. Halfway through the ravine, Crane held up a fist. Everyone froze. Voices, Pashto, coming from somewhere above them. Delia pressed herself against the rock wall, her rifle ready. Through a gap in the stones, she could see 2 Taliban fighters standing on an outcropping 20 meters above, smoking cigarettes and scanning the valley below. They had not seen the team yet, but one wrong move would change that instantly. Minutes passed like hours. The fighters finished their cigarettes, exchanged a few words, and moved on along the ridge. The team exhaled collectively and continued forward. They emerged from the ravine onto a rocky slope overlooking the valley floor. From here, Delia could see the full scope of the disaster. Burned vehicles dotted the road below, some still smoldering. Bodies lay in the dust, Marines who had died in the initial ambush, and clustered behind a makeshift perimeter of wrecked Humvees and sandbags. The survivors huddled under sporadic fire from enemy positions on both ridges. 340 had entered this valley. She could not tell how many were still alive. We need to move, she whispered. Stay low, use the rocks for cover. Rally Point is that cluster of boulders 200 meters north of the perimeter. They began their descent, picking their way through the treacherous terrain. They were 50 meters from the valley floor when the shot rang out. Adeyemi grunted and stumbled, his hand going to his side. Blood blossomed through his fingers, dark and spreading fast. Contact! Right. Hassan shouted, returning fire at a hidden position on the eastern slope. Delia grabbed Adeyemi and dragged him behind a boulder as rounds cracked overhead. Kolchak was there instantly, tearing open his uniform to assess the wound. How bad? Delia demanded. Bad, Kolchak said tightly. The bullet hit his lower abdomen. He needs surgery within hours or he bleeds out. Adeyemi grabbed Delia's arm, his face twisted with pain. Gunny, I cannot make it to the convoy. I will slow you down. We are not leaving you. You have to. His eyes were fierce despite the agony. 340 Marines, Gunny. That is what matters. Leave me a rifle and some ammunition. I will cover your descent. Delia wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But the enemy fire was intensifying, and every second they stayed pinned down was a second closer to failure. Adeyemi squeezed her arm. Get them home, Gunny. All of them. She pressed her forehead to his for a brief moment. Then she took his spare magazines, left him propped against the boulder with his rifle ready, and led her team down into the valley of death. The perimeter was worse than Delia had imagined. Burned Humvees formed a jagged wall around a cluster of wounded Marines, their blackened hulls still radiating heat. Bodies lay where they had fallen, covered with ponchos when possible, left exposed when there was no time. The smell of blood and cordite hung thick in the air, and the constant crack of incoming fire kept everyone pressed low against whatever cover they could find. Delia led her team through a gap in the wreckage. crawling the last 20 meters on their bellies while rounds snapped overhead. A young corporal with a bloody bandage wrapped around his head spotted them first, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Friendlies coming in," he shouted. "We have friendlies." Marines turned to stare as Delia and her team slid into the perimeter. Some faces showed hope. Others showed the hollow emptiness of men who had already accepted death. A figure emerged from behind an overturned vehicle, limping heavily, his uniform torn and blackened with soot. Captain Tobias Rendell looked 10 years older than when Delia had last seen him. His left arm hung in a makeshift sling, and dried blood caked the side of his face. But his eyes were alive, burning with an intensity that only survivors possess. "Delia," his voice cracked. "They said no one was coming." She gripped his good arm. "I told you in Fallujah I would always come back for you, Toby. Did you think I was lying?" Rendell's composure broke for just a moment, emotion flooding his battered features. Then he pulled himself together with visible effort. "How many did you bring?" "6. One wounded on the way in, providing cover fire from the eastern slope." Rendell stared at her. "You came into this valley with 6 Marines?" "7 including me. And we are leaving with everyone who can still move." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Delia, I appreciate the gesture more than you will ever know. But we have over 200 wounded. We are completely out of rifle ammunition, down to pistol rounds and whatever we can scavenge from the dead. The enemy has both ridges and every exit route covered. There is no way out." Delia pulled out her map and spread on the ground. "Show me your defensive positions." Rendell knelt beside her, pointing out the perimeter with exhausted precision. "We have consolidated here, using the vehicles as cover. Enemy positions are concentrated on these ridge lines, with heavy weapons teams here and here. They have been content to keep us pinned and bleed us slowly. Every few hours they probe our lines, pull back, wait for us to weaken further. Why have they not overrun you completely? Because they know we are not going anywhere." Rendell's voice was flat. "They are waiting for us to run out of ammunition, run out of will. Then they will come in force and finish it." Crane studied the map over Delia's shoulder. "What about the road south? It looks like the least defended route." Rendell shook his head. "That is what they want us to think. There's a secondary force dug in along that route, hidden in the rocks. They tried to bait us into a breakout attempt 6 hours ago. We lost 18 Marines before we realized it was a trap." Delia traced her finger along the terrain features, her mind working through possibilities that others would dismiss as impossible. She had spent 8 months studying every valley, every ridge, every goat path in Helmand Province. That obsessive preparation was about to pay off. "What about north?" she asked. Rendell frowned. "North takes us deeper into enemy territory." "That is suicide." "No." Delia pointed to a feature on a map. "There's a wadi here, a dry riverbed that cuts through the ridge about 3 kilometers north. The terrain is too rough for vehicles, but infantry can move through it. It comes out on the other side of the eastern ridge, behind the enemy's main positions." "You want us to retreat toward the enemy?" "I want us to go where they are not expecting." She looked up at him. "They have set this ambush assuming we will try to break out south or wait for rescue from the west. They are not watching their back door because they do not think anyone is crazy enough to use it." "Because it is crazy," Reynolds said. "Crazy enough to work." Kolchak had been assessing wounded Marines while they talked. She returned with a grim report. "I count 212 survivors capable of movement. Another 73 are critical, need to be carried. The rest are not going anywhere." The rest. Delia understood what that meant. Marines too wounded to move, who would have to be left behind. She pushed the thought away. There would be time for grief later. Vega appeared at her side, having established communications with their vehicles using a captured enemy radio. "Gunny, I reached Hassan at the Humvees. He says enemy patrols are moving toward our vehicles. We have maybe 4 hours before they are discovered. 4 hours to move nearly 300 casualties through 3 kilometers of rough terrain, then through enemy-held territory and back to vehicles that might already be compromised." The math was impossible, but impossible had never stopped Cordelia Okonkwo before. She stood and addressed the Marines within earshot, raising her voice to carry across the perimeter. Listen up. I am Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo. I came here with 6 Marines because your chain of command decided you were acceptable losses. We're going to prove them wrong. Heads lifted, eyes focused. Even the wounded seemed to draw strength from her words. We are moving north in 30 minutes. Every Marine who can carry a rifle will form the perimeter. Every Marine who can walk will help carry those who cannot. We move fast, we move quiet, and we do not stop until we are on the other side of that ridge. She met Rendell's eyes. Captain, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Rendell held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All my life, Delia. Let us get our people home. Delia turned to face the valley, the ridgelines bristling with enemies who thought they had already won. They were wrong. We're coming out, she said quietly, one way or another. The movement began in controlled chaos. 212 walking survivors formed a protective ring around the 73 wounded being carried on makeshift stretchers, ponchos, and the backs of fellow Marines. Delia positioned herself at the front of the column with Crane and Rendell, while Kolchak moved through the formation providing what medical care she could on the move. They slipped out of the perimeter through a gap in the northern wreckage, leaving behind the Marines who could not be moved. Delia had spoken to each of them before departing, pressing what ammunition they could spare into their hands. The unspoken truth hung between them. These men would buy time with their lives so their brothers could escape. The first 500 meters passed in agonizing silence. The column snaked through a field of boulders, each Marine moving with the desperate quiet of prey trying to escape predators. Above them, the enemy positions continued their sporadic fire into the abandoned perimeter, not yet realizing their targets had slipped away. Then a shout echoed from the eastern ridge. Pashto words that Delia did not need to translate. They had been spotted. Contact east. Someone yelled, and the valley erupted. Rounds cracked overhead as enemy fighters adjusted their fire toward the moving column. Delia pushed forward, leading the formation toward a rocky outcropping that would provide temporary cover. Marines returned fire as they moved, disciplined bursts aimed at the muzzle flashes on the ridgeline. Hollister ran beside her, her father's badge pressed against his chest beneath his body armor. A round snapped past his ear close enough to leave it ringing, but the young private did not flinch. He kept moving, kept his rifle up, kept his eyes on the path ahead. They reached the outcropping and pressed into its shadow. The wounded were laid down in whatever cover could be found while the able-bodied formed a firing line. Crane appeared at Delia's shoulder, blood trickling from a graze on his forehead. They are repositioning, trying to cut us off before we reach the wadi. How far? 1.5 kilometers. Maybe 40 minutes at this pace. We do not have 40 minutes. Delia scanned the terrain ahead. There, that draw runs parallel to our route. If we push a fire team up the left flank, they can suppress the enemy positions long enough for the main body to advance. That fire team will be exposed the whole way. Delia nodded grimly. I know. I will lead it. Crane grabbed her arm. Gunny, you cannot risk yourself like that. These Marines need you to get them out. These Marines need covering fire more than they need me giving orders. She pulled free and called out 4 names. Marines she had seen moving well, shooting straight. They materialized from the formation. Fear and determination mingled in their eyes. With me, we're going to clear a path. The fire team broke left, scrambling up the rocky slope toward the enemy positions. Delia moved at the front, her rifle barking in control bursts. A Taliban fighter rose from behind a boulder, and she dropped him with 2 rounds to the chest. Another appeared to her right, and one of her Marines cut him down before he could fire. Behind them, the main column began to move. The next 20 minutes were a blur of gunfire, shouted commands, and desperate movement. Delia's fire team leapfrogged from cover to cover, drawing enemy attention away from the vulnerable column below. 2 of her 4 Marines were hit, one in the leg and one in the shoulder, but both kept fighting. The wadi entrance appeared ahead, a dark gash in the ridgeline that promised escape. The lead elements of the column reached it and began funneling through, The wounded passed hand over hand into the narrow passage. "We are through." Vega's voice crackled over the radio. "First group is in the wadi. Keep them coming." Delia felt a surge of hope. They were going to make it. Then the trucks appeared on the southern road. 3 technicals loaded with fighters, racing toward the column's rear. Taliban reinforcements, arriving faster than anyone had anticipated. Reynolds saw them too. "We have enemy vehicles inbound. Everyone move." The orderly withdrawal became a desperate sprint. Marines who could run carried those who could not. The rear guard turned to face the new threat, their pistols and scavenged rifles pitifully inadequate against the mounted machine guns on the approaching trucks. Hassan had positioned himself at the wadi entrance, directing traffic like a man possessed. "Move, move, move. Do not stop for anything." Delia sprinted back down the slope, her fire team following. They reached the rear guard just as the first technical opened fire, its heavy machine gun tearing through the rocks and sending stone chips flying like shrapnel. A Marine beside her went down, clutching his chest. Another screamed as a round shattered his knee. Delia grabbed a fallen rifle and returned fire, her round sparking off the technical's hood. Hollister appeared from nowhere, dragging a wounded sergeant toward the wadi. Crane was there too, his rifle empty, using his sidearm to cover the retreat. And somewhere in the chaos, Vega was screaming coordinates into a radio, trying to reach anyone who might send help. The last survivors poured into the wadi as the technicals closed to within 200 meters. Delia was the final Marine through the entrance, rounds cracking off the rocks around her as she dove into the narrow passage. They ran through the wadi in near darkness, the walls pressing close on either side. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed off the stone. The enemy was following, but the terrain favored the defenders now. The narrow passage would force the Taliban to come single file. 30 minutes later, they emerged on the eastern side of the ridge. The vehicles were visible in the distance, still hidden beneath their camouflage netting. Hassan had done his job. "We made it," Reynolds breathed. "We actually made it." Then the RPG streaked out of nowhere, and the lead Humvee exploded in a ball of fire. Enemy fighters had found their vehicles first. Delia watched in horror as a second rocket struck another Humvee, then a third. Within seconds, their entire motor pool was burning. 12 kilometers to friendly lines. Nearly 300 Marines, most of them wounded. No vehículos. Delia turned to face them all, her voice cutting through the despair. 12 kilometers. In normal conditions, a healthy Marine could cover that distance in under 2 hours. But these were not normal conditions, and these were not healthy Marines. Delia organized the column with brutal efficiency. The most mobile survivors formed a rotating perimeter, while the wounded were distributed among those strong enough to carry them. Stretchers were improvised from rifles and uniform blouses. Marines who had been strangers 12 hours ago now leaned on each other like brothers, sharing the weight of bodies that could no longer move on their own. They marched through the dawn, the rising sun casting long shadows across the barren terrain. Behind them, the smoke from their burning vehicles marked a location the enemy would soon investigate. Ahead, 12 kilometers of hostile territory stood between them and safety. The first hour was the hardest. Muscles that had been pushed past exhaustion found reserves they did not know existed. Marines who had gone 30 hours without sleep kept putting one foot in front of the other through sheer force of will. And through it all, Delia moved up and down the column, adjusting the formation, redistributing loads, speaking quiet words of encouragement to those who needed them most. Rendell fell into step beside her during a brief halt. "I have seen a lot of leaders in my time, Delia. Career officers, academy graduates, decorated veterans. None of them could have done what you are doing right now." She shook her head. "I'm not doing anything special. These Marines are saving themselves. I am just pointing the direction. You broke every rule in the book to come here. You risked your career, your freedom, your life." Rendell's voice was thick with emotion. "Why?" Delia looked at the column of battered survivors stretching out behind them. "Because someone had to. Because they are Marines. Because leaving them to die was never an option. A shout from the rear of the column interrupted them. Contact! Enemy fighters, 500 meters, and closing. Delia sprinted toward the threat. A group of Taliban had picked up their trail, moving fast across the open ground. They were outnumbered, but the enemy had the advantage of mobility and fresh ammunition. Rear guard for a line, she commanded. Everyone else, keep moving. Do not stop for anything. The rear guard peeled off and took positions behind whatever rocks and depressions they could find. Delia dropped beside Hollister, who was already sighting down his rifle. Steady, Private. Wait for my command. The enemy closed to 300 meters. 200. Delia could see their faces now, young men with old eyes, hardened by years of war. Fire! The rear guard opened up in a coordinated volley. 3 enemy fighters dropped immediately. The others scattered, seeking cover, their advance momentum broken. Leapfrog withdrawal, Delia ordered. Fire Team 1 move. Half the rear guard sprinted toward the column, while the other half maintained suppressive fire. Then they switched, the first group covering while the second moved. It was a textbook fighting retreat, executed by exhausted Marines running on nothing but adrenaline and determination. They repeated the maneuver 3 times before the enemy broke off pursuit. The Taliban had learned that these Marines, despite their desperate condition, still had teeth. Crane appeared beside her, breathing hard. That was some fine soldiering, Gunny. That was survival, Sergeant Major. Nothing more. They pushed on. The kilometers blurred together. The sun climbed higher, turning the march into an ordeal of heat and thirst. Water was rationed carefully, the wounded given priority. Twice more they encountered enemy patrols, and twice more they fought through, leaving bodies in their wake and collecting new wounds of their own. Vega had been working the radio continuously, trying to reach friendly forces. Finally, during a brief rest halt, her face lit up with hope. Gunny, I have contact with Camp Dwyer. They know we are coming. They are sending vehicles to meet us at the outer perimeter. How far? 3 kilometers. A murmur rippled through the column. 3 kilometers. After everything they had endured, safety was 3 kilometers away. Delia raised her voice so everyone could hear. You heard her. 3 more kilometers. That is all that stands between us and home. We have come too far to stop now. On your feet, Marines. Let's finish this. The column surged forward with renewed energy. Marines who had been barely conscious found the strength to walk. Those who had been walking found the strength to help carry others. The promise of survival pulled them forward like a physical force. The outer perimeter appeared on the horizon, a line of fortifications and guard towers marking the edge of friendly territory. And beyond it, a convoy of vehicles was racing toward them, dust clouds trailing behind. Delia felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since that first distress call had crackled through the TOC speakers. They were going to make it. Against all odds, against every obstacle, they were going to make it. The lead vehicle reached them and Marines poured out, fresh faces full of shock at the battered survivors stumbling toward them. Medics rushed forward with stretchers and 4-bags. Someone pressed a water bottle into Delia's hands, and she drank without tasting it. The walking wounded were loaded into vehicles. The critical cases were stabilized for transport, and slowly, painfully, the remnants of the convoy that had been written off as acceptable losses crossed into friendly territory. Rendell found her as the last survivors were being loaded. He did not speak. He simply wrapped his good arm around her and held on, his body shaking with silent sobs. Vega ran past, tears streaming down her face, calling her brother's name. Somewhere in the crowd of survivors, an answering voice called back, and Delia watched as the siblings collided in an embrace that said everything words could not. Crane stood beside her, his weathered face softened by something that might have been pride. You did it, Gunny. You brought them home. We did it, she corrected. All of us. The convoy rolled toward Camp Dwyer's main gate, carrying 312 Marines who had been left to die. The base had turned out to watch their arrival, hundreds of service members lining the road to witness what should have been impossible. But as the gate came into view, Delia's relief turned cold. Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Tate stood at the entrance, his uniform immaculate, his face carved from stone. Behind him stood 4 military police officers, their hands resting on their sidearms. Tate's eyes found hers through the dusty windshield, and she saw nothing there but calculated fury. The vehicles rolled to a stop, and Delia stepped out to face the man who had condemned 340 Marines to death. Tate's voice carried across the gate with the cold authority of a man accustomed to obedience. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, you are under arrest for desertion, theft of military property, and direct violation of lawful orders. Surrender your weapon and submit to custody immediately. Delia stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel. She was covered in dust and dried blood, her uniform torn, her body running on nothing but willpower. But she stood straight, her eyes locked on Tate's with an intensity that made the MPs shift uncomfortably. I'm not going anywhere, Colonel. That was not a request. Tate nodded to the MPs. Take her into custody. The 4 military police officers moved forward, their hands on their weapons. But before they could reach Delia, a wall of bodies materialized between them. Sergeant Major Crane stepped in front of her, his massive frame blocking the MP's path. Behind him, Rendell limped forward on his wounded leg. Then Hollister. Then Kolchak. Then a dozen more survivors. Then 24, forming a human barrier around the woman who had saved their lives. Crane's voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel. These Marines are not going to let you arrest the woman who just pulled them out of hell, Colonel. And neither am I. Tate's face flushed with fury. Sergeant Major, you are interfering with a lawful arrest. Stand down immediately, or you'll be charged alongside her. With all due respect, sir, Crane replied, there is nothing lawful about what you are doing. And there is nothing lawful about what you did to that convoy. A murmur rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Tate's eyes darted nervously to the growing audience of Marines and soldiers who had gathered to witness the confrontation. I do not know what you're talking about, Tate said carefully. Delia stepped around Crane, pulling out Adeyemi's tablet. She held it up so everyone could see. This is an intelligence assessment sent to your staff 48 hours before the convoy departed. It warned of a high probability of ambush in the Sanjin corridor. It recommended delaying the convoy and using an alternate route. That document is classified, Tate snapped. You had no authority to access it. The document was received and opened by your aide, Colonel. You knew the ambush was likely. You sent 340 Marines into that valley anyway, because you did not want to delay a supply run that was supposed to make you look good for General Morrison's visit. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Marines who had lined the road to welcome the survivors now stared at Tate with dawning horror and anger. This is ridiculous, Tate sputtered. I made a tactical decision based on the information available at the time. The intelligence was not conclusive. 28 Marines died in that valley, Colonel. Delia's voice rose, carrying across the gathered crowd. 28 families are going to get the worst news of their lives because you cared more about your career than their sons and daughters. And when the ambush happened, you did not send help. You wrote them off as acceptable losses and deleted the evidence. Tate turned to the MPs. I gave you an order. Arrest this woman now. The MPs did not move. They were looking at something behind Tate, their faces suddenly pale. A new voice cut through the tension, deep and commanding. Stand down, Colonel. Tate spun around. Major General Patricia Harding stood behind him, flanked by 2 officers from the Inspector General's office. She was a compact woman with silver hair and eyes that could cut through steel. Her presence seemed to drain all the authority from Tate's body. General, Tate began, this Marine has committed multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. She must be held accountable. General Harding walked past him without acknowledgement, stopping in front of Delia. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, I have been monitoring communications from this sector for the past 12 hours. I am aware of what you did and why you did it. Delia braced herself. Yes, ma'am. I'm also aware of the intelligence failures that led to this disaster. Harding's gaze shifted to Tate, and her voice hardened. Lieutenant Colonel Tate, you are relieved of command effective immediately. You will surrender your sidearm and submit to custody pending a full investigation into your handling of this operation. Tate's face went white. General, you cannot possibly believe the accusations of a junior NCO over a decorated officer. This is a misunderstanding that can be easily explained. The evidence does not suggest a misunderstanding, Colonel. It suggests gross negligence at best and criminal misconduct at worst. Harding nodded to the IG officers. Take him. The same MPs who had been ordered to arrest Delia now moved toward Tate. He backed away, his composure finally cracking. This is not over. I have connections. I know people who will not allow this to stand. Your connections are exactly why I am here personally, Colonel. Harding watched as the MPs took custody of Tate. I do not tolerate officers who sacrifice Marines for political advancement. Not on my command. Not ever. As Tate was led away, the crowd erupted. Marines cheered, embraced, wept with relief. The impossible had happened. Justice, however imperfect, was being served. Vega pushed through the crowd, pulling her brother Alejandro behind her. He was thin and pale, a bandage wrapped around his forearm, but he was alive. She brought him to Delia, her eyes shining with tears. Gunnery Sergeant, this is my brother, the one I told you about. Alejandro Vega snapped to attention despite his injuries. Gunnery Sergeant, my sister says you came for us when no one else would. He swallowed hard. I do not know how to thank you for that. Delia looked at the siblings, at the bond between them that had survived the valley of death. Thank your sister. She never gave up on you. Crane approached as the Vega siblings moved away, wrapped in each other's arms. That was well done, Gunny. All of it. It is not over yet. Delia watched Tate being escorted toward a waiting vehicle. There will be investigations, hearings, testimony. This is just the beginning. Maybe. But those 312 Marines are alive because of you. Whatever comes next, that cannot be taken away. Hollister appeared at her side, pressing something into her hand. It was her father's badge, warm from being held close to his heart through the entire ordeal. I promised I would bring it back, he said quietly. Delia closed her fingers around the worn brass, feeling the weight of her father's legacy. Thank you, Private, for everything. An aide approached and cleared his throat. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, General Harding requests your presence in her office. Immediately, Delia looked at Crane, then at the survivors still streaming through the gate. Whatever waited for her in that office, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else. One step at a time. General Harding's office was sparse and functional, the walls decorated with unit citations and photographs of Marines in the field. Delia stood at attention before the desk, her battered uniform a stark contrast to the orderly room. She had not slept in over 40 hours, had not eaten in nearly as long, but she kept her spine straight and her eyes forward. Harding studied her for a long moment before speaking. At ease, Gunnery Sergeant. Sit down before you fall down. Delia lowered herself into the offered chair, her muscles screaming in protest. I have read the preliminary reports, Harding continued. You commandeered 4 military vehicles without authorization. You assembled a team of volunteers for an unsanctioned combat operation. You've directly violated orders from your commanding officer, and you led a rescue mission that extracted 312 Marines from certain death. Yes, ma'am. Do you understand the position this puts me in? Delia met her eyes. I understand that I broke regulations, General. I am prepared to accept the consequences. Harding leaned back in her chair. The consequences? She was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. Gunnery Sergeant, I have been in this corps for 31 years. I have seen officers and enlisted alike bend rules, break protocols, and occasionally commit acts that technically violated the letter of military law. Most of the time, those actions were self-serving. Occasionally, they were necessary. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base where survivors were still being processed and treated. What you did was both unauthorized and absolutely necessary. Lieutenant Colonel Tate made a decision that condemned 340 Marines to death. When he refused to correct that decision, you did what any true Marine should do. You found a way to bring your people home. Delia felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she had not realized she was carrying. Tate is finished, Harding continued. The Inspector General has already uncovered evidence of the deleted intelligence reports. His aide is cooperating fully in exchange for leniency. By the time the court-martial is complete, Vernon Tate will never wear a uniform again. And if I have anything to say about it, he will spend the rest of his career explaining his decisions to a military tribunal. She turned back to face Delia. As for you, Gunnery Sergeant, I'm not going to punish a Marine for showing more courage and integrity than the officers above her. Your actions save lives. That matters more than paperwork. Delia exhaled slowly. Thank you, General. Do not thank me yet. Harding returned to her desk and picked up a folder. I have been reviewing your service record. 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations, a reputation for tactical excellence, and unshakable loyalty to your Marines. And for the past 8 months, you have been wasting away behind a desk because some medical officer decided a shoulder injury made you unfit for field duty. The shoulder is fully healed, ma'am. It has been for months. I know. I had your medical records reviewed this morning. Harding opened the folder. Effective immediately, you are restored to full combat duty status. More than that, I am authorizing your transfer to a unit that could use someone with your particular skills. She slid a document across the desk. Delia picked it up and read it, her eyes widening. MARSOC is standing up a new training cadre for female operators. They need experienced combat leaders who understand what it takes to succeed in special operations. Your name came up repeatedly when I asked for recommendations. Delia stared at the orders, hardly daring to believe what she was reading. You have earned this, Gunnery Sergeant. Harding's voice softened. Go train the next generation of warriors. Teach them what you know. And maybe, somewhere down the line, one of them will do for another trapped convoy what you did for this one. Delia stood and snapped to attention. I will not let you down, General. I know you will not. Dismissed. She walked out of the office into the bright Afghan sunlight, the transfer orders clutched in her hand. For the first time in 8 months, the weight on her shoulders felt manageable. Crane was waiting outside, leaning against a concrete barrier with his arms crossed. From the look on your face, I am guessing it was not a court-martial. Delia showed him the orders. He read them and let out a low whistle. MARSOC training cadre. He shook his head with something like wonder. You went from facing prison to shaping the future of special operations in one conversation. Apparently saving 312 lives counts for something. They walked together toward the medical facility where the survivors were being treated. Along the way, Marines stopped to shake Delia's hand, to thank her, to simply nod with respect. Word had spread through the base like wildfire. Everyone knew what she had done. Inside the medical tent, she found Kolchak checking on the wounded. The combat medic looked up with exhausted eyes that still managed to sparkle with satisfaction. Adeyemi is stable, she reported before Delia could ask. The surgeons say he will make a full recovery. Probably be back on his feet in a few months. Delia felt relief wash over her. She had been carrying guilt about leaving him on that ridge, even though there had been no other choice. She found Adeyemi in a recovery bay, his torso wrapped in bandages for lines running into both arms. His eyes were closed, but they opened when she approached. Gunny. His voice was weak but warm. I heard we made it. We made it. All 312 of us. Including you. Adeyemi smiled faintly. I told you to leave me behind. And I told you I was bringing everyone home. Delia squeezed his hand. Get some rest, Staff Sergeant. You earned it. Outside the medical tent, she found the rest of her team gathered in a loose circle. Vega stood with her brother, their shoulders touching. Hassan was sharing a canteen with Hollister. Crane supervised them all with the quiet pride of a patriarch watching his family. These people had risked everything on her word. They had followed her into hell and walked out the other side. The bonds forged in that valley would last the rest of their lives. So what happens now, Gunny? Hollister asked. Now I go train the next generation of operators. Delia looked at each of them in turn. And all of you go back to being the finest Marines in this corps. A helicopter was warming up on the nearby pad, its rotors beginning to spin. Her ride to the next chapter of her life. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about your favorite moment, or if you know someone who showed the kind of courage that refuses to leave anyone behind. And if you have not already, hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next story. Delia shook hands with each member of her team, holding on a moment longer than protocol required. When she reached Crane, the old sergeant major pulled her into a brief embrace. "Give them hell, Gunny." "Always, Sergeant Major." She walked to the helicopter and climbed aboard. As the aircraft lifted off, she looked down at Camp Dwyer, growing small beneath her, at the figures of her team, still watching from the ground. Her father's badge was warm in her pocket. 312 Marines were alive because she had refused to accept that some lives were expendable. And somewhere ahead, a new generation of warriors was waiting to learn what it truly meant to never leave anyone behind. Gunnery Sergeant Cordelia Okonkwo leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she was at peace.